Welcome to the ConfigureITDone Podcast. The ConfigureITDone Podcast is a place where successful thought leaders in the SAP space come to share their leadership styles, their tips, and their unique stories on how to run successful large-scale SAP programs. Listen to the podcast to learn from their successes, their failures, their career stories, and their inspirations.
This podcast is in partnership with the Black Dog Institute, who aim to create a mentally healthier world for everyone. If you wish to support the cause, please donate via the link below.
Welcome. Season 4, episode 2 of the ConfigureITDone podcast. I'm back with my colleague, Bethany. She's been great on the previous couple of podcasts, and she's brought along a fantastic guest today, Alexandra Thorogood. Nice to meet you.
Oh, thanks, Jay. Thanks for introducing me to your podcast and the team.
No problem. So Bethany's asked me to do the quick fire question round first, just to get to know you. For those of you that don't know Lexi, is it okay to call you Lexi, by the way?
Yeah. So most people know me as Lexi or Lex. So yeah.
Excellent. All right. So Lexi, let's dive into the quick fire question round. I've got a couple of questions here. Where are you currently working?
I work for Tata Consultancy Services, so TCS. So I'm the Nextgen practice director for the APAC region. So we focus on transformation side of the business. So TCS has a long history, I think, with some of the larger clients in terms of managed services. But we are working with Oracle and SAP and other customers to look at how we can transform their business and get involved with their implementation. So
excellent. I'm sure we'll learn a bit more about your role in the company later on in the podcast, and we'll tap into that. Bit more personal stuff about yourself. Obviously, you're on a podcast. What is your favorite podcast? And you can say ConfigureITDone if you want to.
I have had a look at a few of yours, and I thought they were really good. I like I guess a lot of the self-help type podcasts, and there's one that I've recently taken up called "Do You Effing Mind?" And it's about I guess mindfulness and being aware of and one in particular is teaching people how to treat you, and so they delve into to the workings of the mind, and so I really enjoy that, and there's some other good ones in that series. So
brilliant. Okay, I'll be sure to have a listen to that. And favorite book?
I love Essentialism by Greg McKeown. It's it's the pursuit of less, I guess. What is the minimum path to getting things done? And I think in these sorts of, in the work that I do in terms of transformation, the path of least resistance is always the best, right? So I look at how we can strip back our lives and just survive, I guess, on the bare minimum and get to where we need to be quicker.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay.
Jay, have you read that one, by the way? It's amazing.
I haven't. No, I haven't.
It's really, really good. It's very like anti sort of hustle culture, but in a positive way. Like it still talks about the value of working hard and getting things done, but just not overfilling your schedule. Because if you don't have time to sit down and think, you're not even going to go anywhere in the first place. I loved it. Such a good book.
I'm currently reading the High Performance book. So there's a podcast series and it interviews high performers, a bit like Lexi, and they basically just put all the best bits together of all these podcasts and made a book. So it's Jake Humphrey, and that's fantastic. So that's what I'm reading at the moment. But back onto yourself, Lexi. So favorite music or film?
I love Quentin Tarantino, and I love all those older movies. I guess I'm showing my age, but the Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, Reservoir Dogs is like one of my favorites. Little Green Bag, I love that song. So every time it comes on, it always makes me happy.
Yeah, Tarantino's on Miramax, isn't he? And I didn't realize that Disney actually owned that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so I've been going back and watching some of the older ones in the last few weeks in over the Christmas break.
Brilliant. Okay. Favorite restaurant?
I love Watson's on the Bay. It's a beautiful seafood restaurant and an amazing view of the harbour, and yeah, whenever I get the chance, we'll get together with some friends, and it's a great place to relax.
Yeah, great spot. I was there over Christmas actually, and I just moved to Manly, so you can get the ferry over to Watson's Bay. So yeah, great spot. What's your favourite destination or holiday destination?
Well, I love skiing, and one of my favorite places is Whistler in Canada, and because there's so much you can do there: skiing, snowboarding, sledding, or and then summer you can also mountain bike, and it's a great place, and there's a really great vibe of people, and yeah, so some of the resorts in BC, and yeah, I'm hoping to get back and do a bit more skiing when the borders open up again. So.
Excellent. Okay. And then your management style, Lexi, if you could describe that in one word, what would it be?
Well, I guess what I try to do is, so I would say servant leadership. I'm here to serve my team, and I think one thing I've found as I've transitioned from a SAP project manager role into program management is the need to service your team and check in on people all the time, and never more so now than this pandemic, and really understanding what's holding people back and how can I make them more successful. And that works for our team, they back me, I back them, and it becomes, I guess, a win-win. But I guess unless you're prepared to serve, then you shouldn't be prepared to step up and lead.
Have you got any examples of that, Lexi, that you've done recently with your team through the pandemic?
Yeah, so I recently come off a big project with one of Australia's major retailers, and we were working on replatforming to Azure, and a lot of our team were based in India and offshore, and it is really tricky with a time schedule that you can't move, and there's business constraints. So really being able to tap into what's driving people and what are the blockers on a program is so important to meeting those deadlines, particularly where you have a lot of offshore team members. And also it becomes more so now that effectively interstate now, we're almost offshore, right? So we're working with teams, in Western Australia and in Perth and in New Zealand, just as much as we are with some of our overseas counterparts. So, really checking in on people each day, and even just a quick 15 minutes. So what's going on? How's it going? Is there anything else that can be done? Where do you think that we're going to get held up? And start to tap into signs of any sort of risks and issues that are going to really, delay the program in any way, and get on top of it as quickly as possible.
That's exactly Jay's leadership style, by the way. I love it. I can attest to it because he's my team lead, and it makes a massive difference when I don't know how you're going to take this publicly, Jay, because he's not the best at taking compliments, but it makes a huge difference to the way that your team respond, because they know that they can reach out to you and get support rather than like punishment for not knowing what to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, a problem shared is always a problem solved, right? Like, you can always bring a different perspective on things, and sometimes when people are working from home on their own and they come across issues, they feel isolated in many ways. So really getting to know people and try and get everyone to keep their cameras on so you can see if they're really okay, right?
I love it. And Lexi, what's a bucket list thing for you to do?
Well, I've had a lot of time, I guess, not on the snow. So I've always wanted to go to Japan, and so that for me is something that I really wanted to do this summer in Australia, but it's probably not going to happen now because the borders are not going to be open before the snow melts. So. Yeah, so hopefully next year, the Japanese culture and the people and the food, what's not to love, and my parents recently did a trip there for the spring festival in Kyoto, and they just told me how amazing it was, and it doesn't matter what age you are, there's always something to learn there, right? So I thought, yeah, it's definitely something I want to do.
Absolutely. I love it. So, Lexi, the biggest reason I wanted to get you onto this podcast, actually, we've done some different work and podcasts and had a lot of conversations with clients about diversity and especially women in SAP. And you posted, I don't know if I showed you, Jay, but you posted this picture with all of your amazing team members from TCS, and it was all women. And I gave you a call to talk about it, and you were talking about how you're really passionate about bolstering women, especially within SAP, and providing them with more opportunities so that they can move up, essentially, which I think is a really relevant topic at the moment. So we'll get into that soon. But first, I wanted to ask you, what initially drew you into SAP, and what's changed since you first started your SAP journey?
Yeah, thanks, Beth. I joined SAP or started working with SAP back in the early 90s. As soon as I finished uni, I got a job on SAP implementation project with Pasminco Mining in Melbourne. So Pasminco were one of the first companies to step into SAP R3, the older version. And I was working in the HR team looking at moving all of their HR records and their processes and systems across to SAP. So in that job, I travelled around to the mine sites and smelters and got to know some of the people on the ground, and I guess started the journey. And people met it with a lot of reservation. Why do you need all that my information? What are you going to do with it? And how is this going to help me? And I think back then it was about efficiency, trying to get rid of the blockers in people's daily work days and make things easier to get things done. And I don't think that that SAP has changed in that way, because in one of the most recent implementations I did, we were looking at machine learning and robotics and things like that, and robotic process automation. And so in a manufacturing implementation that I did, we were looking at getting ruggedized tablets onto the shop floor so that they could enter in all their QA results instead of transcribing all their barcodes 3 times onto paper to finish a manufacturing process. So it makes the whole end-to-end, process much simpler. And even people who haven't had experience with hands-on with computers can definitely see the benefit of being able to scan a barcode instead of having to transcribe it onto paper and the inefficiency associated with that. So I think SAP is amazing the way that they have evolved over the last 20 or so years in staying ahead of the latest advances in work processes and practices, and making life easier for businesses to run, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, Lexi, obviously Bethany at the beginning touched on women there in SAP. Now, we've just recently done a talent survey, and we send out the survey to over 6,000 SAP resources. And that one of the questions was basically, are you male or female? And only 20% of the market from those 6,000 came back as women. So it's a real challenge in the market as a lack of women. And like we said, we've spoken before about women in SAP. Can you tell me a bit more about the vision you have for women in SAP, and secondly, what would you like to see change?
Yeah, I think it's not a natural path, I think, for women to get into these type of leadership roles, particularly around the program management space and the project management space. So, what I've been trying to do in my role in TCS is really work with, we have some amazing talent in terms of technical leads who have started to take on more active roles in terms of transformation. And I think also too, the way that SAP has changed is it's no longer a purely programming type environment. It's so much more with transformation. It's the business needs to come across unified data structures. It's a lot more fit to standard. And so It's not so much as I'm going to go away and build you the biggest and the best, most customized system that you won't know how to operate, and you have to come to me to get my services to run it, right? So it starts to change where we, as a system implementer, we're partnering with the business to help them run better, right? And so the role of a system implementer has also changed, and with that, the role of women, it's so much more important, because it becomes about understanding where that customer is coming from and where they need to get to, and bridging that gap and bringing them on that journey, because quite often, the old consulting way was, I'm going to come in and fix everything for you. And, with the number of, implementations that fail, and at the moment I'm doing a post-implementation review on a project that hasn't gone so well. And always it comes back to, did we listen to the business? And active listening is so important to get a good outcome for the customer. And that's where women really can bring a new perspective to the consulting and the system implementer side of SAP, because we're able to understand that, empathetically listen, understand where they're at, and see with vision where they need to get to, and partner with them to get to that place. So it's a lot more about business readiness. It's a lot more about change management, because originally, I guess, we looked at SAP implementation, so said, was it on time? Was it on budget? Okay, it's successful. And then how many SAP implementations do you hear about where, yes, it was on time, yes, it was on budget, but all the people in the business are whining, right? And they're like, I can't do what I used to be able to do, right? And is that not the measure of whether, first of all, you should be able to do what you could do before, and you should be able to do a whole lot more, right? So, I think that the business readiness and the change management is something on so many projects that gets very much overlooked, or it gets deployed on a project as a separate division. Oh, we'll get someone to do that fluffy stuff, right? That's not my problem in project management. Wrong. It has to be hand in hand with the project. It has to be it's the eyes and ears of what's going on with the client. So if it's not involved in managing, I guess, those risks and issues, and identifying, I guess, critical success factors and meeting those critical success factors, then it's not going to be a successful project. So one of the things that I'm trying to work with our team, and on a most recent project, we had a brilliant QA lead. We had a really fantastic lead. Bethany was talking about the photo of the women that we had in that team, and one of them was the QA lead, who was meticulous, who uncovered any problem and always brought it to the program attention. And likewise, the lady who was running the UAT, she was in touch with a lot of people in the business. She knew where the problem children were, and she would say, okay, we need to work on this, And so bringing those leads forward and start to procure them as leaders in the SAP landscape, they're the people who not only have the technical skills, like above and beyond anything I would know, right? But they also have the makings of being a fantastic leader, So we need to procure those people who have been working, 5 to 10 years in SAP, who need that new opportunity, who need that step up, right? And coach them to let them know they can do it, right? And I sort of always, try and talk with them about, why can't you do that, and try to get them to step forward and take ownership of a lot of these things, because at the end of the day, that's the bond that gets the project through. That relationship that they have with key people, with our clients and so forth. That's what makes it successful.
Sure. So it's almost like almost building confidence and making sure that they are aware that they can do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about with women in leadership and women in SAP basically is the personality differences. And like I've met women that are not like that at all. They're not really, empathy is not their thing, and they like tinkering with things, and it's a more masculine oriented personality trait. So there's always going to be outliers, but for the most part, it's all on a bell curve. And most sort of females sit within this very relational area, and that's how their personalities are oriented. And most men, this might be controversial, but most men tend to be the opposite, and they're more about things. Women tend to be about people, and men tend to be about things. So I think what you're saying is the reason women are really important in leadership is because we do have that level of empathy, and we're really relational. And if you don't get the initial relationship right between the business and then the technical teams, an implementation isn't going to go right in the first place.
Exactly.
I love
And
it.
so I think a lot of the time those people they do have those technical skills that the men have got, but they don't necessarily go above and beyond and own that situation and take the ownership with the client. And that's important for integrity and trust, because they're the two things that make a strong team. And the team is never going to be the client and the system implementer and SAP and Microsoft. It has to come together, and so it. When I say I check in on the team all the time, I'm checking on SAP. I check in on Microsoft. How's things going? What's happening? Where do you think they're going to be issues? So I treat them in the same way that I talk to my own TCS team members, that I talk to my client team members. Because they have the foresight to see what's going to happen, right? And quite often, as a vendor, they sometimes don't feel that they can say the truth, right? So everybody's contribution does bring it to the floor.
I love that. Communication is key. Now, when we first spoke the other week, you were juggling children and work, which is something I can massively relate to. I think you were in the car and you had kiddos because it was school holidays, and I've been in exactly the same situation. So I wanted to ask you, what's the biggest piece of advice that you have for working parents? I think it's been a big issue since we've been in this pandemic and juggling kiddos and work. What's your biggest piece of advice?
Yeah, well, I guess there's a tendency for parents to just give kids everything that they need and drop everything and drop their own stuff. And I've never been about that. When I had my first child, I went back to Europe at 6 weeks after she was born, and all I had was a baby carrier and a blanket, right? And I had nothing. And I always maintained that I wasn't going to change when I had kids, because, when I was younger, when I was working in management consulting, and there was always parents who were like, oh, I got to drop everything because my kids need me right now. And I used to hate that, because I was like, how is it fair that someone like me has to lift the weight for everyone else, right? So when I had my kids, I was like, you have to be independent. And I've always spoken to them as adults from when they were very young, and I encourage them to get jobs and catch public transport in the safest way, and that sort of thing as they've got older, and not to treat me as a servant, because I have a life too, and I have to get to the gym, and I have friends that I need to catch up with and maintain. And we can still celebrate the wins and losses in our lives, both their lives and my lives. It's not always about them, and I think that there's a level of respect that comes with that, because they always want to do stuff with me when I have free time, so that's good, right? It's good when you get to teenage years and they actually want to come and do stuff with you.
Yeah. I really, really love that, honestly. I was raised in a really similar way, and it fostered a lot of independence because I knew that my mother prioritized taking care of herself and making sure that she got out to see girlfriends, and she always made us beautiful, healthy dinners and helped with homework. And, she did all of that, you know what I mean? So I never felt cast by the wayside, but I knew that she was her own independent person. And that made it, I suppose, a lot easier to be independent. The more independent they are, the more they'll kind of, take care of themselves and not rely on you if you've got work to do and stuff to get done. Love it.
That's right. Yeah. And I think you said to me, that mums who go and make their kids elaborate lunches and then they eat the scraps for themselves. I mean, that's,
yeah, like the crust of the sandwich, and I'm like,
yeah, and
no.
that's just rubbish, right? Like, we are all equal, and and I think that people who raise kids that aren't independent, they breed that they have a sense of entitlement. And I mean, you guys would probably see that in recruitment, right? People who rock in, come straight from uni and go, where's my $100,000 job, right? and and it's
Funny 'cause
probably a
it's true.
common scenario, I'm sure, right?
So true. So true.
And my daughter recently, she got a job working at a florist near our house, and she was so nervous as she taking her resume in there, and the guy said, he's Italian, he said, she's going to work hard, and I said, yeah, she'll work hard. He said, she's going to sweep the floor, and I said, yeah, she'll sweep the floor. And the first weekend she worked there, he made her weed all between the bricks in the car park. And it was a hot day, and she came home and she was like, oh, Mum, I don't know how long I'm going to do this. Maybe I'm better off to leave and go to McDonald's. And the next day she went into work, and he took her to the cool room and he said, you worked really hard yesterday. And he goes, I'll give you an extra $50 for your hard work. And she came home and she was so excited. And she said, Mom, you wouldn't believe it, I got $50. And I was like, wow. And she said, I was just cursing after that yesterday. And I said, well, see, when you just, get on and get the work done, you get rewarded, right? And so for me, that's special. They're the little wins in life that that are worth noting, right?
That's brilliant. What a great example that is, Lexi. I'd love to tap into your knowledge again and steer the conversation back to women in tech, and again get your one piece of advice on what you would give women in tech. And obviously I reverted to that talent survey earlier, and only 20% the SAP community are women. So yeah, how do we get more women into SAP?
Yeah, I think I was listening to one of your podcasts about the way the education system is. One of the other guests was talking about how the schooling hasn't changed over the last few years. And I have a daughter in year 11, and she's coming into the final year of school, and she said to me, I just don't know that that I'm going to be able to get into medicine, and I'm like, well, first of all, I was never good at science, right? And it's just about having that mentorship at the early stages of your career, where you see that there are openings and there's more than one way to get into a career. One of the things that TCS has recently partnered with Deakin University, and we are sponsoring upcoming women into technology through Deakin University, and pathways for women into leadership roles through higher education. And there was nothing like that when I went. I mean, I went to Melbourne Uni, and everybody who did commerce did accounting and went to work for one of the big four. That's what you did, right? But I sort of took a left turn and ended up in SAP, partly because of my love of business process re-engineering and that side of things, and it just fitted well with me, right? But a lot of people don't see pathways from those initial, science, arts, law, commerce degrees and so forth. They don't see the transition from a degree into a career path, and where that can take them on the journey. And I think one of your other people who was on the podcast was talking about how you start off and I started very much more in HR, and then I went into HRIS systems, payroll, and then in the last few years I've been much more involved with manufacturing and supply chain, and that brings different learnings and different exposures to people. So I think particularly around supply chain and logistics, there is very few women in that area. In manufacturing, very few women in that area. You tend to get a lot more in HR and finance and those sort of areas. But a lot of the people that coming into it, who are working in the functional areas in SAP are coming from an engineering background. And so, it's not necessarily, just one path to get to where you need to be. So if you look at a lot of the people in SAP now, the people who work in manufacturing, they've come from engineering, and a lot of the people who come in the HR and the finance areas come from business-based backgrounds. So those pathways, I think, from uni to careers, and companies like TCS, Accenture, Deloitte, they have a responsibility to build that, right? And that's why we are getting involved with Deakin University to start to build those pathways for up and coming graduates to understand that there is opportunities there and there's an amazing career that they can have.
I love that. And that's exactly how you do it, honestly. I think it's partnering with universities and ensuring that women know that there's confidence to enter into SAP and what SAP looks like. And here's women that are in SAP. And, when you're doing that, it's a lot easier to attract women into the SAP space.
And graduates starting in a mentorship program with people who've had, seasoned experience through different implementations. Like, I still learn so much from a lot of the other partners within our practice, not just in Australia, but also overseas. And, on one of my most recent engagements, I got teamed up with a partner who's in Texas, and so he did some work on the Boots Walgreens alliance. They basically did the SAP re-platform to Azure, which was similar to the project that I was doing last year. And when I came to difficult points, difficult steercos with some difficult situations, he called on his experience and coached me through some of those things and said, what to look for and where to go. And so those mentoring and coaching opportunities are so vital, I know, for me to get to where I am now. So it's important that when we come across graduates, that we foster them to be successful and to help them grow,
I completely agree. I love it. And speaking of coaching and mentoring, actually, we wanted to ask you, it's clear that throughout your career, you've worked hard to get to where you are. Who's been the biggest influence in your career, and what would you say they really taught you?
I know it sounds cheesy, but it'd have to be my dad, right? My dad was a pharmacist, and we grew up behind my dad's pharmacy in country Victoria. And I started working for my dad when I was about 11. Just packing shelves and wiping things down, and opening the door for customers and things like that. And my dad always put customers first. He always taught me, I guess, that perseverance and hard work is what you've got to do. There isn't a light switch that you can flick to make things happen for you. You need to make it happen for yourself, and that sort of held me pretty well through life. I don't expect anything from anyone. And I always, a master of my own destiny, and that definitely comes from my dad and his small business hard work ethic, I guess.
Excellent. And Lex, I've really enjoyed your company and tapping into your insights on this podcast today. Before we let you go, have a think about who you'd like to see on the podcast. But I've got one question before then, and that is, if you cast your mind back to when you was kind of working with your dad, what's the one thing you would tell your younger self?
Yeah, I think I think you've got to do what makes you happy. And I know that sounds kind of cliche, but just talking to my daughter about her decisions with her subjects and so forth, like maths and chemistry comes easy to her. She loves it, and she's curious and she has that mindset. And she said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do, what degree I'm going to do. And she said, but I find it easy, and then she gets good marks in that area. So what comes easy to you, and what you enjoy, you have to foster that and say, okay, I need to find how I can make a career out of that, be it whatever it is, because if you end up doing something you really, really don't like, and again, I'll come back to my dad, right? Because his father wanted him to study medicine, and so by default he went into pharmacy, and he wasn't really happy for a lot of period of his life, until he ended up selling the pharmacy, and he bought a farm, and and he had chestnuts and cattle and that sort of thing. And so in some ways you do need to follow your heart to what makes you happy and find a way to make it profitable to pay the bills, right? And so if you have a passion, and you really have to go with that. And mine is efficiency and business process improvement. I get excited about that, and so this is why it's been great for me to have a career working with SAP, because that they make businesses run better, right? That's what they have, the tools that we can bring to the customer to make the businesses run better. So you have to find something that makes you happy and work with that.
Excellent. Well, I don't know about you, Bethany, but I've really enjoyed today. That was absolutely fantastic. And like I said, before we let you go, Lexi, is there anyone else you would love to see on the Configure It Done podcast?
Yeah, I would really love to see a good colleague of mine, friend of mine, Aidan Brecknell. He was the GM of the supply chain here in Australia, and he worked with me on my first S/4HANA Cloud implementation. And he has come from working in a family business similar to me, and he worked very hard within SAP, and recently he's been appointed COO at SUSE Australia, APAC region. So he has an amazing experience, not only within SAP, but within the technology community in Australia. And he's been someone who's been extremely supportive of me throughout my career. And I'm so happy for him with this new appointment. So I would love to hear more about his journey.
Excellent.
We'll definitely reach out to him.
100%. All right, Lexi, well, thank you very much for your time. That was absolutely fantastic.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Bethany.
Thanks, Lexi.